Hey guys, in this video we're going to be talking about how to subtract two functions in order to evaluate some new function, which is the subtraction of two other functions that you're given. Then to wrap up the topic, we'll talk about how to actually evaluate this new subtracted function at a specific value that you're given. If that's something you need a little help on, be sure to stick around to the end of the video, and without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Evaluate the indicated function for f of x equals x squared plus 1 and g of x equals x minus 4, where the indicated function is f minus g of negative 1. So let's just first kind of take a moment just to talk about notation, what this is actually asking us to find. Basically, whenever you have like f, plus minus g times g, f over g, whatever it is in parentheses like this, and then some other number out here, in this case it's minus 1, it could be anything. Could be 10, could be 0, could even just say x. Basically what it's saying is what you're going to have to do is first of all figure out what this function f minus g of x is. So that's kind of where we're going to have to start. In this case, we're doing f minus g. We're going to want to start by finding f minus g of x. And then once you have figured out what f minus g of x is and have that kind of generic function for f minus g, then you can kind of deal with the negative 1 that we have in the parentheses here to evaluate this function f minus g of x at x equals negative 1. So that's going to kind of be always your first step, is finding the generic function for whatever it is that it's telling you to evaluate. So let's start there. F minus g. How do you find that? Well, basically what this is saying is you're essentially going to take this kind of notation here, f minus g, and really all you're going to do is replace this f with whatever your function f of x is, replace this g with whatever your function g of x is, and that should tell you what the function f minus g of x is. So to do that, all we really have to do is take our function f of x, so x squared plus 1, take our function g of x, replace g with this whole function here, x minus 4, and then evaluate your function f minus your function g. So one thing I really want to take a moment to point out here, this is very important. Whenever you're subtracting two functions, f minus g, whatever the two functions are you're subtracting, you need to make sure that your entire second function, the thing that you're subtracting, needs to be fully in parentheses. Really, when it comes to any of these problems where you're combining two functions, whatever the operation is, whether it's adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, or anything like that, I generally would recommend putting parentheses around wherever your function f, wherever your function g, whatever your different functions are. Just put them in parentheses at first. Then you can think about how these different operations are going to distribute throughout the parentheses or whatever the case is. A very common mistake I see is people will just write your function f, so they would just write x squared plus 1, and then put a minus sign, and then write your function g, x minus 4. This is not going to turn out to be the right function, because the way that we have this written here, notice what's going to happen with this minus sign right here when we go on to simplifying this function. It's going to have to distribute within the parentheses, and it's going to be applied to both this x and this negative 4 in here. If we don't put the parentheses around the function g, that's not going to distribute. So over here, that minus sign is only being applied to the x. So this is not going to be the right function. So you do want to be very careful with that. You want to make sure that you're putting parentheses around each of your functions. Then you can think about how to simplify it after that. But just make sure that you're doing that. So now that we have properly put our parentheses around this, we can think about how to simplify this whole function now. So this basically tells us that f minus g of x is going to be x squared plus 1. This first set of parentheses isn't really going to do anything with our simplification process, but now this minus sign has to distribute. So minus x, and then the minus will distribute to the negative 4. Negative times a negative is a positive, so we're going to get x plus 4. So notice how that's different from what we had over here. We have minus x plus 4. If you forget your parentheses, you're going to have minus x minus 4. So you're going to end up with a different function there. Okay, so now we can combine our like terms. We have an x squared term. That's not going to be able to combine with anything. We have a minus x term that also won't be able to combine. But then we have a +1 and a +4. So we can add those together, giving us +5. So this is our generic f minus g of x. Now what we need to do is evaluate this at -1. So basically what we need to do now is find f minus g of -1. So all this notation is saying is go to your function f minus g, which we know is right here, and wherever you see an x, you're going to replace that x with a -1. And again, make sure you put it in parentheses. That's also very important here. So we're going to go to this function right here, x squared minus x plus 5. Wherever we see an x, we're just going to replace it with a -1 in parentheses. So we're going to get -1 squared minus -1 in parentheses plus 5. So all we did was go to our function f minus g of x, replace our x's with -1s. I forgot my negative sign there, but that should be a -1 in the parentheses there, -1 in the parentheses here. Now we can simplify this. So now -1 squared is the same as -1 times -1, which is +1, minus -x. The negatives are going to cancel and turn into a positive, so we get +1, and then +5. 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 5 is 7. So f minus g of -1 is going to be 7. Now you should be feeling a little bit better about how to subtract two functions, but there's a little bit more that you want to build on from here. A similar but equally important topic that you're going to want to be familiar with is how to create a linear function that has given indicated values. Fortunately for you, I've made a video about how to do exactly that, which I think you're going to find very helpful and definitely has some knowledge and tips that you're going to want to know. So just go click on that video right over there and I'll show you how to do that.